am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. In this episode, I am interviewing myself. It will just be me. And the reason for that is I thought it would be a good time to really reflect on some of the lessons so far in 2019 from the guests that we've had, and also just talk about how we can reflect as a broader community in order to look at how we set goals for our future in 2020 and beyond. And really what this podcast is all about is how we disconnect from all of the stressors that we have in our daily lives and really get back to and pause on the things that make us tick. And a lot of times when we don't give ourselves silence or pause, we don't allow that process to happen for ourselves. And many of us walk around with belief systems, whether that be religious, political, something a friend told you when you were little, a coworker told you when you started your career, and so forth. And then we believe them to be true without questioning them. And it's not about whether they're wrong or right. It's whether we make sure that our actions and words that we use each day are aligned with the person that we believe we are. And in order to get to that authenticity of who we are, it's a process because there's many, many layers, and we can think we've got it and then we don't because life happens. And so there's never a point in time in our lives where we can believe that we got this. What we need to be is more aware of how we affect the people around us and our internal state of happiness. So as many of you know, my methodology is business balance and bliss. A business plus balance equals bliss. And the whole point of that formula is so that we can click into it easily in our work days, in our careers, whatever that may be. So the business side of that methodology is the stressors that we have. And that could be at work, that could be at home, that could be however we're feeling internally of change management that's happening, or business process change that is happening, or technology change. All of these things can create stress inside of our bodies. Now, what we are so fortunate to have when we tap into it are these internal tools that guide us. And this is in yoga called the intuitive mind, that we actually know what our truth is, but we allow the rational mind to override it. And that rational mind can be thwarted if we take the time to get in touch with what we know in our gut or our intuitive mind to be true. So a lot of times we make decisions in our careers or our lives that we know while we're making those decisions, it doesn't feel right. But instead we keep moving forward because we believe we can overcome it and so forth. Now, it doesn't mean we won't learn from those experiences. However, when we don't listen to that intuitive mind of what is telling us our truth, then a lot of times we mute some of the most important information that we need to tap into. And many of our guests over 2019 have given us great tips to be able to understand how that actually happens in our lives and what journey they've gone on in order to be okay with the decisions that they are making today once they realize that those decisions that they thought in the past were the right ones didn't serve them. And that's when we get off from being authentic and being something that we think other people want us to be. And when we start understanding that piece in the middle, that space in the middle between what we think we should be or what people think we should be versus who we are as an authentic person, that is when we can identify what is holding us back. Those could be internal stories that we have in our own lives that create patterns in us throughout our life into our adulthood that we can see show up. Or we can see that we are repeating patterns of the generations before us. And then we need to make a decision. Is that pattern serving us? Or is it a pattern that we would like to break? And in order to break a pattern, we have to work at it. We can want it. But if we don't actually work at breaking the pattern, what happens is we just keep repeating it. And we can live our life with intention when we actually decide to practice these things in our life. It's no different than when you go to work out, and during that workout, you know that in order to get better, you have to practice in between different pieces of that. Throughout my yoga practice, when I started, I remember thinking, I'll never get this, I'll never touch my toes. And it actually wasn't even a negative self-talk. It was just that I didn't think I was capable of it. And the more and more practice that I put into it, the more I realized that it was important that I look at all the little idiosyncrasies of the poses, the breath, and the movement in order to achieve different poses that I wanted. And in my yoga classes, a lot of times when I'm teaching, I have new students come in and they look at the people around them that maybe have been practicing yoga 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and think, I should be like that right now, and get a feeling like they're not good enough, or maybe I shouldn't come back because I can't achieve what that person next to me is doing, instead of respecting the experience. And I think there's a lack of that many times, of just respecting the experience that other people have in order to better yourself, not to feel competitive with it, not to feel competitive with other people's expertise, but how can their experience benefit you and teach you in order to be a better person yourself? And what experiences and expertise do you have that you can teach others? Now, many of us grow up with belief systems that we hold on to. And some of my guests this year had talked about those belief systems that were actually holding them back. One in particular that I found fascinating were two of my interviews, one with Jeff Thompson and the other one with Lauren Mangan, who both had similar themes of being an introvert or shy, and how that belief system affected them as they were growing up and into their careers, and what they had to do to overcome it. And when I talk about respecting the experience or expertise, that also means when people are different from you. So if you are an extrovert and you're in a room with other introverts, when we start coming to a place of compassion and understanding that person's experience, that person's life, we actually can better communicate with the people around us and help them thrive. And one of the things that Laura talked about was not underestimating the introvert in the room or the person that is shy, that they can't be a leader because of it. Their way of leading may be different, but it doesn't mean that it's less successful just because it's different. It's all about us taking those moments of understanding and how do we get the best out of people that have these belief systems that might pull them back. So for instance, one of the things Laura talked about was making sure you give space to people that are more introverted or shy, whether that be in meetings or in their preparation for a meeting with other people as well, or time that they just need to take away in their own space when they're in a group of people because it's just too much for them. So I thought those were really good tips for us, because it's not just about the introvert themselves or being shy, but also about the people around you on your teams or in your personal lives that may be different from you. But how could you think about going about that relationship differently? How could you help them to be successful? And maybe it wasn't the same way that you became successful, but finding out what would help them to do that. The other thing that Jeff talked about was how he had to push himself to be uncomfortable in order to succeed as a leader that he is today, running an international association. And in order to break away from that shyness, he put himself in positions on purpose to make himself uncomfortable. So when he talked about learning to be in front of people and learning to be a teacher with middle schoolers so that he could actually break himself of feeling uncomfortable in a group of people, and also how could you have a more challenging group than middle schoolers? But understanding that there are ways for us to break these patterns as well. Just because it might be predetermined by generational patterns or DNA and so forth, what can we do to just keep improving ourselves and making ourselves better? And as we go through our career, some of those things that you do early on may not still work based on new roles that you have or new change that you're up against. But how can you go about thinking about making those little changes as you go and observing? So when I talk about that space, that transition between our belief and what we can be authentically, those are the moments of pause where we start learning about ourselves and saying, look, I was really uncomfortable in that meeting, or I didn't react the way that I had hoped to react. So what could I do different? That space, that pause, is our internal tool to link back to that intuitive mind of letting us know what our truth is. Go deeper. Why did that make us uncomfortable? What can we do different the next time? The other really important lesson that I felt was brought out by a few of the interviews that I did was about not letting opportunities go. So many times I have helped to mentor other staff people or people seeking advice. And the biggest thing that I see is people get in their own way. So they say they want certain things, but when those opportunities actually arise, they start the negative self-talk or telling themselves that they can't do it, or an opportunity comes to them that they didn't realize that they would have, and they turn it down because that wasn't the plan. And one of the things Sandra Wiley talked about was not having this hard and fast plan. You need a framework, right? Those goals that you're going after. When I think about my own career, how could I have even imagined that this would be the work that I was doing when I started out working for a Big Four accounting firm in audit as a CPA? The way that the framework has happened is I wanted to create success, but I also understood from an authentic standpoint who I was trying to serve. And so if we know from a personal standpoint of who we're trying to serve, as we make different business decisions, we can ensure that we are aligned with our personal purpose. So for me, because of different experiences that had happened in my life, I grew up as an entrepreneur in an entrepreneur family. My grandparents were entrepreneurs. My mother was an entrepreneur. And I saw the struggle firsthand of entrepreneurs to stay in business. And the things that they could not control or even understand because maybe they didn't have an accounting background and needed that kind of advice and help to stay in business. And for me, when I look at my bigger framework and personal purpose, It has always been to ensure that those people that are in business don't suffer, and that they're able to keep doing their passion in their lives so that the people that benefit from them also get the advantages of what they put out into the world. So it's a level deeper, right, than just thinking about our business goals or I want a certain promotion and so forth. Because when we just silo ourselves into one opportunity or one guiding light, the problem with that is that we miss the opportunities that are just sitting around us because we're not noticing. And instead, when we create a framework of what is our personal purpose and what do we want to achieve, and as opportunities come our way, rather than immediately rejecting them, being open to those possibilities of what that can mean in our life, and does it actually align with who we are and the value that we want to create for others? And if it aligns with that personal purpose, and we take those moments of transition and pause, and we see that it is our truth, that we feel good about that decision, pivots can be made in our lives without feeling like we have to be perfect right away. Where Sharon talked about that, Sharon Bryson had talked about that she had had different job offers come to her that she kept turning down because it wasn't exactly what she thought was going to happen in her career. And it wasn't until a friend of hers says, if not now, when? And that is a really important question to ask ourselves, is what are we waiting for? So life is in the present moment. We can have all of these goals and future opportunities that we want to grab, but if we don't stay in the present moment and look around us and be aware of what opportunities and possibilities there are, we could miss so many things that might be our next best self to keep improving. Now, not everything is perfect, right? That as we go through our careers, there's going to be failures. There's going to be decisions that we make that we can't predict that wasn't going to go our way. Jody talked about this as well, Jody Padar, about the only way to know what you want to do is to know what you don't want to do as well. And this comes with experience. When we talk about respecting the experience, is respecting your own experience and making sure that the moves that you make are not for others, but you're being true to yourself, which is that intuitive mind, that space between the rational mind and that authentic self. So when we take those moments to pause and we look at our lives, is it aligned with our personal purpose and who we want to be? If it's not, it's really important to identify what things do not align with us. And if they don't align with us, what can we do different to pivot, still utilize the experience that we have, not quit everything we do, but actually take what's great about something and be really intentional with how you're going to move forward. Again, it's a framework. And rather than being hard and fast on a plan, how do you pivot and shape your career and your personal life in a way that will feel more authentic to you? Now, when we talk about authenticity, we had a couple guests talk about sales. And a lot of times in sales, we feel it can be not authentic when we're dealing with a salesperson that's just in it for themselves. Now, it's really important that we identify, if we are in a sales position, why we are doing what we are doing, to make sure that we are doing it for the right reasons. So when I talked to Grace Horvath, she had talked about sales is not actually selling. It is about helping to build better relationships. And it's also about understanding that other person and serving them. Jennifer Wilson had similar comments along this, is that if you're selling for your own personal reasons, or how someone else is pushing you to sell that might be not aligned with who you are, then you're doing it for the wrong reasons. That we sell to serve. And if it doesn't fulfill a pain point, then why are we doing it? And if we are doing it purely for the win and the money, then we should know that that's why we're doing it. That let's not pretend in our life that that isn't why we're doing it. We want it to be authentic, and we want to make sure, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you are a revenue focused person in your personal purpose, you're like, I love to win. And the value I create by winning makes me feel good and makes people feel good around me. And I'm a good leader that helps other people win and so forth. But if it's not always about money, we also need to consider, when you look in the mirror, which is what Jennifer talked about, are you okay with who you are? Do you feel good about the actions that you've taken, the belief systems, the words that you utilize, and how they are affecting others? So it is a good time to review, take that space between our authentic self and our rational mind to get into that intuitive mind and understand, is it our truth? Pause, be silent, and allow yourself to think about, am I living the authentic way that I want to live that aligns with my personal purpose? Are my belief systems around the work that I do aligned with my personal purpose? And this is all really important stuff when we talk about how we ensure that we are living our best life, that we are doing the work that we always want to do. Now, doesn't mean work is perfect. We are never going to like 100% of what we do. However, it is important that the majority of what we do fulfills us and makes us happy. And if it's not, rather than letting our mind go to a negative place, how do we actually allow our mind to go to a positive place instead? And really understand, rather than blaming the outside world or the stories that we have in our bodies that we hold with us as we move into adulthood, rather than using those excuses, when I talked to Samantha and Ty Mo, one of their big takeaways was taking 100% responsibility for our lives and for our actions. Now, that is a really hard exercise when you think about it, that we need to be responsible for the decisions that we make, the words that we use, and how we interact with others, without blaming somebody else, which is really hard because that is just our natural way to self-deceive ourselves, really. Because what happens with deception is we actually probably know the right thing to do, but if we don't want to do something, it's hard for us to take 100% responsibility for not doing it. We'd rather look to the outside and see, well, there must be some reason I don't want to do it, instead of taking responsibility for our actions. So one of the ways that they talked about doing this was really leading with an open heart and understanding that we're not bad people. Nobody's a bad person because we made certain decisions. And when we're taking responsibility, this goes back to the premise of non-judgment, that we don't want to judge these observations that we have about ourselves. When we take those moments of pause and the transition between the rational mind and understanding who we are authentically, what we don't want to do is judge ourselves and be really hard on ourselves for decisions we've made when we're being really truthful. Again, this is the study of ourself and how we go about thinking from a third party perspective, why did I make those decisions? Why did I react in that way so that I don't do it again? And what strategies would I need to put in place to ensure that I don't? So going back to an introvert, if I feel like I didn't show up in that meeting like I needed to show up in that meeting, the next time I need to make sure that I set some time aside to create an agenda, to talk to people in advance, to make sure that there's space on agenda for me to explain my viewpoint, rather than letting the room take over and me be drowned out. So we can't just hope for things to happen. We need to put those tools in place and make action plans to actually change the habit, the pattern that we see that shows up in us when we're taking responsibility for that. Jeremy Jones talked about how he did it with a live 360 feedback. And so if you haven't heard the term of a 360 feedback, what that is having people underneath you, around you, that you report to, all give you feedback on your performance and how you are in the workplace or with customers or as a leader. He decided to do this face-to-face. Now, typically these are done through anonymous surveys, but he organized a meeting where he was in a room and allowed that feedback to come back. Now, to me, that is such a big example of leading with an open heart and taking 100% responsibility. That you're not defending, you're not blaming, you're listening. And you're seeking to understand. So what's really important about the exercise that Jeremy did, as hard as it must have been to do it, is that when you get feedback a lot of times that are anonymous, you can't go one level deeper and try to understand why someone is feeling that way. All you can read on that page is the feeling itself or the outcome itself, not really what drove that outcome. So by having that meeting that he did, he was able to go deeper to understand what kind of shifts he would need to make. Now, there were decisions that he said, I wouldn't change. And I know why I did those things, and the outcome is the outcome. So we have the right to hold on to certain ways that we react and behave and go about our days because those are the right things. But we also should understand the things that we need to improve and the why behind it. And so that we can get to the how, that we're not just looking on the surface, that we keep seeking to understand. Richard Francis had a great line in his podcast interview with me when he said, you can't expect different results when you keep doing the same thing that you've always done. So I mean, I always say, like, I just keep walking into the window, right? Like, if we keep doing the same thing over and over again, we're not going to change. So we have to do the hard work to actually be a little bit uncomfortable and see that, you know what? Some things are not going to feel so good until they feel fine. But it takes that repetitive motion in order to change a pattern in ourselves. So once we identify that there's a certain pattern of behavior, then what happens is we need to go back and look at what could we do, what little thing could we do each day in order to change that pattern. And Paula Rizzo, when I spoke to her, had talked about staying curious, that really being open to give yourself permission for the shifts in your life that are going to happen. That we can't just expect that our life is on a straight line, that there are things that we cannot control, but rather than judging it, how do we stay curious and open to understanding those changes and how they're affecting us internally, and then making those little changes so we show up in the way that we want. So we're very intentional about the way we show up in our life by staying curious, by observing ourselves, by doing the research just about us to understand what our personal purpose is, to make sure our work aligns with that, and that we stay with an open heart to understand the people around us and the experience that they have. And lastly, one of the big themes that came out in some of my interviews was about gratitude. And I think this is a perfect time to be thinking about what we are grateful for. So our minds are actually wired to think to the negative. Those are the things that we come home and talk to our spouse or our friends about all the bad things that happened that day, or just to share and get it off our chest. But when we think about that, what happens is that negative energy starts being put out, and that negative energy is contagious, and it actually doesn't help us overcome that negative feeling if we're holding on to it. Instead, if we can be training our brain to look for the positive or the things that we are grateful for, it's a skill and a practice that we have to cultivate in our lives. So when I talked to Eric Green, he had talked about the struggle that he had had and how depressed and sad and stressed he was getting because he was feeling so negative about his business and his life, rather than feeling gratitude for the things that he did want in his life. And I think it was a really poignant conversation when we talked about this, and he was so open about the way that he actually identified it with himself and understanding that when you talk about taking 100% responsibility, he looked at how he was affecting others and he didn't like the energy that he was putting out there. So if we go back and identify what is positive in our life, what are the things that we love to do, then we can shift the work that we are doing to make sure that the majority of our time is spent on that. And the things that we don't love to do, maybe there are other people that we work with that could do those tasks because they enjoy doing it. Or maybe there are things that we need to do and let go of and not feel like we need to do everything. That we decide which things are the most important to put our time towards so that we feel better on the inside and feel grateful for the work that we are doing as well. Now, Melissa Monty, when I spoke to her, had talked about her past and how she had to get over the shame of that past self in order to move forward. And a lot of times when we look at our past or different things that have happened, whether that be in our career or our personal life, we can feel shame. I know that for many years, I had that same problem because I had many things that had happened growing up that I thought if people knew that they may think differently of me or not respect me. Even though, of course, that's not true. Everyone holds those internal stories and we all have our stories. And it really, helped me in yoga to understand all of these different stories that people come in with to my classes and to classes of other teachers of mine as well, where we see all of these stories and what people are holding in their bodies. And you realize everyone has this individual experience. And instead of thinking it's just me or it's just you, it's better to understand that we all have this human experience and condition that we want to be better. And so if we keep having the negative self-talk or thinking that we will never be better, there's no way to change that paradigm. And it's important to cultivate those feelings of gratitude within us for what we have right now. So this all links to what I was talking about in the beginning, is having this framework of what we want, but not getting so far past the current moment that we aren't grateful for the accomplishments that we already have, big or small. They don't have to be huge, and those are the things that we forget to thank the people around us each day, or even give ourselves We don't have an audience, when we're done to clap. And so how do we celebrate ourselves? And it can be the littlest things that we set an intention for our day to get 1 or 2 things done, and we got them done, and feeling gratitude for actually getting those things done in the day. So rather than feeling like everything is bad, turning that around to understand that we are grateful for whatever we have right now. There has to be at least one thing that we can find in our day or our life that we are grateful for, even if it's that we woke up in the morning and we breathed. So as we move into the next year, and we have some great interviews coming up in 2020, I want us all to think about over this time of the holidays where things actually slow down at work, and the emails slow down and the texts slow down, and people kind of go to their personal lives, whether that's alone or with family or friends, that we take those moments of pause and allow ourselves to be silent, allow ourselves to review our year, our way that we've gone about interacting, or the way that we are striving for things that maybe don't align with who we are, and question everything. Be curious. And as we go through that process, help yourself set those goals for the coming year in order to figure out what little changes could I make in my daily life to break some of those belief systems that might be holding me back, so that I can achieve and design the life that I desire. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more, so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.